Hi, everyone. Welcome to the School of Reinvention podcast. I am your host, Roger Osorio. I help parents and corporate reinvent themselves into first-time purpose-driven entrepreneurs. I teach entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm author of the book, The Journey to Reinvention, How to Build a Life Aligned with Your Values, Passions, and Purpose. I'm excited to be joined by Darrin Schenck, who is a coach and speaker and VP of Sales at Triage Now. Darrin is a former professional racquetball player, reaching a career-high rank of number 18 in the world. After retiring from professional competition, he returned to the sport as a head coach of the ASU Racketball Club, where he guided the women's team to 15 top 10 finishes, including a national championship, and helping the men's team to 6 top 10 finishes. Over 36 of his players have earned All-American honors, and Darrin was twice selected as Collegiate Coach of the Year. Currently, Darrin is the Vice President of Sales with Triage Now, a company that provides telephone nurse triage services for workplace injuries. Darrin is also the survivor of a head-on collision with a wrong-way drunk driver. Since then, Darrin has served as a volunteer speaker for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Darrin, thank you so much for joining us, for your willingness to share so many stories that we're about to dig into.
My pleasure, Roger. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's jump right in. Let's talk a little bit about early in your career. When you were young, and on our prep call, you talked about this plan that you and your family had for you to go into wrestling and set yourself up for a great scholarship and then, pay your way through university. So, you guys got to work on putting this plan into motion, and it seems things didn't go exactly according to plan. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, not exactly. And I noticed just over your head there, you have the Penn State shout out. This past week, Penn State's wrestling team set a NCAA record for the team total as they dominated the national championships. And
I did not know that, but
yeah, that's been a part of my life since I was a little kid. My dad wrestled in high school and then for a small college in Pennsylvania and beyond before we moved out here to Phoenix. And so I was brought up as a wrestler. I have very vague memories of going into a couple of competitions where he was the coach and listening to him talk to some of the wrestlers ahead of time and address the team and stuff. They're hazy because it was such a long time ago, but I do remember that, and it's been part of my life, since the beginning. And as you mentioned, the plan was that I was going to wrestle in high school.
Yeah.
Do a good job of that, get myself a college scholarship, because my family comes from, let's say, humble backgrounds financially. And so that was definitely my best shot at getting getting to college was on an athletic scholarship. And being a smaller guy, wrestling was a good sport for me to be involved in because it's weight class divisions. I tried my hand at Little League Baseball and did okay, but it was clear by age 12 I was not going to be a standout baseball player. But I was a pretty good wrestler, and I had a great coach because my dad had been, working with me since we have 8mm film, for those of you who know what that is, of he and I wrestling in the backyard where I kick him in the shins and he falls down and I jump on top of him as a 2-year-old kid, right? So literally...
These are the original reels.
Yes, exactly. So fast forward to the summer before high school. So here in Phoenix, that's my freshman year in ninth grade. And my dad, this would never happen today, but my dad walked across the street with me to the high school because the wrestling team was practicing during the summer. And he introduced me to the coach and said, "Hey, my son is going to come out for the wrestling team in the fall. Can he start working out with the team now?" And again, this stuff doesn't happen anymore. The coach is like, "Yeah, sure. If he shows up on time and does the work, then he's welcome to join us, and we'll see if we have a spot on the team." Just so you know, we have state champs at 112 and 105. So if your son's going to make the team, it's going to be at 98 pounds. Now, I was not a whole lot heavier than that as a small kid, but I still had to lose some weight to make that weight. And when you only weigh 110 pounds and you have to try to find, a fair amount of weight to lose, it's not easy. So
you got to give up an arm or something.
Oh, man, it was rough. I should have had this haircut back then. That might have helped a little bit. but I did the work. I showed up. It was very hard. It was very, very intimidating. I mean, there were seniors in high school, and I'm technically, still in 8th grade, exiting 8th grade and coming into high school. And that's such they're such formative years. As kids, we grow so much in that time. And again, I'm trying to make the team at 98 pounds. So, the heavyweight and all the bigger guys are at practice working hard and stuff. And, I come in and I'm like scared out of my mind. But, it was a welcoming environment, even though I was very intimidated, because we were all there for the same reason, to practice our craft and get as good as we can to make the team, and then, try to put together the best record we could. So the day comes for me to get my shot at making the varsity team as a freshman, and I had to lose weight, and I was miserable doing it. But I got down to 98 pounds. I had to weigh in the day of, which they typically don't do that anymore for health reasons. Weighed in the day of, and I ended up wrestling against a close friend of mine at the time who was also the same size as I was. And we were the only two that were wrestling for a position on the varsity team at 98 pounds. So I just kept remembering what my dad said. Be first. Make sure you're the one that dictates. And so the coach blows the whistle. I go to shoot a takedown. He sprawls to avoid it, which is defensively what he's supposed to do. And I remember kind of slipping a little bit and him sort of landing on top of me. And I heard a noise, and the coach yelled, don't, stop. Don't move. You're hurt. And I wasn't even sure which one of us he meant at first. And then Will got up and walked away, and I rolled over on my back, and then I started seeing stars, and I remember my face started to tingle, and then I couldn't feel my feet anymore. And he's like, I think you hurt your neck. Don't move. So I'm laying there staring at the lights and trying not to move, and I'm starting to panic, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be paralyzed. I'm going to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life, all these things. So the coach, sends somebody to call for an ambulance, which was luckily for me right across the street. The ambulance comes in, straps me to the board, puts the strap over my head so I can't move my neck at all, puts me up on the gurney, rolls me out, takes me across the street. Well, this was long before cell phones and, even pagers and that kind of stuff, right? So my parents don't know what has happened. So the coach waited, and by 7:00, when I didn't show up for dinner, my dad drove to the school to see what was going on, and the coach was sitting there on the back of his pickup truck, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. Darrin's okay. We took him over to the hospital, told him what happened." So the nurse's office is locked. None of the records are available. They have no access to reach my parents, right? So the coach waited and told my dad what happened. My dad goes across the street to find me. In the time that had elapsed, I had gotten sent to a different hospital, which was a neurological specialty hospital. Now that sounds very ominous, but the hospital across the street just didn't have all of the equipment necessary for what they thought I might need. So it was more precautionary than anything. But of course, my dad and my parents didn't know that, right? So they get word that I'm down at Barrow's Neurological Institute. So they come down, and I'm in a bed, and I'm in a room with somebody else. There's the curtain divider, of course, and my stomach is growling so loudly that the other guy was complaining. So because I hadn't eaten all day trying to make weight, and then I got injured and I couldn't sit up. So I ring the nurse call button, and I told her, I'm like, I'm absolutely starving. Is there anything that you can bring me to eat? She's like, oh, geez, well, we can't sit you up. She's like, I got an idea. So she went to the cafe and got 6 chocolate shakes that were about this big and put a bendy straw in it. And she sat it by my head and bent the straw into my mouth so I could suck it down. So on an empty stomach, I sucked down 6 chocolate shakes. So now I've got an ice cream headache, and I'm just wired from the sugar. And then, my parents show up, right? So again, it turned out that I had not had a significant spinal cord injury. I tore some ligaments in my neck and then broke what's called my transverse process, which is if my thumbs are your spinal cord, your transverse process sticks off the sides. So either the bone broke first and then the ligaments tore, or the other way around. But I broke that bone, which is kind of, in the grand scheme of things, unnecessary, right? But I tore ligaments in my neck, so I had to wear one of those neck brace collars for a while. And it scared me so much that I never did go back to wrestling. And so that, in an instant, all of my plans for the next 8 years of my life, 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, in an instant were gone. And that was a really, really tough time period for me. I remember walking around in high school with that stupid neck collar on and people tapping me on the shoulder trying to get me to turn my head. Just wondering, now what? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I had this all planned out and it's gone.
Yeah.
And that was a tough time frame. But as hindsight is 2020, I discovered the game of racquetball about 6 months later, and my life went in a completely different direction.
Man, that, I mean, one of the things I want to lift up from that is the fact that these things happen that you can never predict. You can prepare all you want. You can be as ready to compete. You weighed in at 98 pounds like you were supposed to. You trained and practiced the way you were supposed to. You did all the things you were supposed to.
Yep.
And yet these things happen, right? These things cannot be planned. There's nothing you could do to mitigate them or avoid them completely or anything like that. You can maybe reduce the risk a little, but at the end of the day, there's always a risk that something can happen that you don't plan for. And I think this is the part that, is really important in the story, because someone who's on the journey to reinvention and taking a shot, whether it's at entrepreneurship or at a new job or whatever it might be, something can happen that has nothing to do with your business, that has nothing to do with any of this, that just changes everything. It throws your plans out the window. And like you said, the moment it happened, all these things were racing through your mind. And then, of course, you're at the hospital and you find out, okay, it's not as bad as I imagined, which I think is a case in a lot of things. I think we always imagine the worst in certain moments. And then you get the information. It's not good, but it's not as bad as you imagined.
But I'm not paralyzed.
Okay, right. Yeah, exactly. And it's somewhere in the middle. It's still not great, because this plan you had for wrestling is no longer going to happen. And now you have to find a way to come to terms with that. But like you mentioned, and it doesn't happen overnight, 6 months later, you come to discover another sport.
Yeah.
Tell us about the discovery of that sport, how you discovered it. What happened? Like, what was it that introduced you to this game?
So let me preface this by saying I love my uncle. And what I'm about to say is no disparaging thing to him.
Okay.
But my uncle calls my dad and I up, and he's like, hey, I'm going to go play racquetball. Do you guys want to join me? And at the time, my uncle wasn't a pillar of fitness. Let's put it that way. And here I am, this cocky, I still have the wrestler attitude, right? And I'm a high school freshman, so I think I know it all. And all of that dynamic, right? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm sure that I can run circles around you. So you just need to show me what to do, right? So there's so much geometry involved in the game of racquetball that you cannot, as a beginner, walk in and really have an idea of what you're doing. So my uncle, who was, a lot older than I was, and again, not as fit as I was, ran circles around me. And back then you played games to 21. So he said, I'll spot you 15 points to 21. And I'm like, okay, whatever. That won't be necessary. So we played 4 games, and I scored 1 point in 4 games. Like, he wasn't trying to do anything too offensive where he was going to make a mistake, but he just kept making me chasing the ball and dealing with the geometry of the sport. And I just was lost. I was beside myself, right? And I couldn't believe it. Like, I guess the best word is offended that I just got humiliated like that. So there was racquetball courts at the high school across the street from my house where I went to high school. And so I was so upset by this development that I got a racket and a ball, and I would go practice. And for a month, every day after school, I went and practiced just so I could have a better chance of beating my uncle the next time around.
Yeah.
So in a month's time, we had our rematch, and he spotted me 15 points again. And the last game, I actually beat him. Now, he still spotted me 15 points, so I only scored 6. But that's not the important point. The important point was I won. But I was hooked because I could do this sport on my own, much like wrestling was. yes, you have a team environment, but when you get out there on the mat, it's just you. And racquetball, unlike Little League Baseball, was also a very individual sport. And you could do an awful lot of it on your own. Add into it the fact that, as a 16-year-old guy, there's a bunch of girls hanging around the racquetball court, trying to play and stuff. And so I thought, yeah, you know what? This is where I should be. So a couple of months later, I get integrated with some guys that play at that park that are pretty good in relative terms. And one of the guys shows up with some information about a pro tournament that's going to be in Tempe, Arizona. And it's like half an hour from my house. And I'm like, I want to play. I want to do it. I want to do this. So I come home and I ask my parents for the money, and they're like, well, no. Why don't you mow some lawns and wash some cars and earn the money so that when you go do this, it'll really mean something to you? So I did. I carried the flyer around to the neighborhood and said, hey, can I wash your car? This is why. And people were like, yeah, sure, kid. Here's $5. Here's $10. And pretty soon I have my entry fee ready to go. And I show up the day of the tournament, and I'm playing the first hour of the first day in the lowest amateur division that there is, called novice. Mm-hmm. And I lose 15-1, 15-0. And I was done in like 20 minutes. And it was almost as bad as the experience with my uncle, right?
Yeah, except they didn't spot you 15 points.
Bingo. So I'm out of the tournament already. So I'm like disappointed. I'm sitting on the bleachers pouting because I took the day off school for this and I'm already done, right? And then while I'm sitting there, a couple of the pros start warming up for their match. And I was like, wow, like these guys are amazing. And again, 16-year-old kid, they're walking around in these cool warm-up suits, traveling around the country playing racquetball for a living. Some of them had very attractive women with them. I'm like, where do I sign? Like, I want to be one of these guys. And despite having that experience and then subbing in for somebody who did not show up and losing again just as badly, in that moment, I decided I'm going to be a pro racquetball player. And that sounds like such an audacious, unrealistic dream to shoot for, because I didn't know what I didn't know at that stage, right? And yet I made the commitment and the decision that day that I was going to be one of those guys. And thus my journey began.
One of the things that really stands out for me about that story, and I think this is important for anyone on the journey to reinvention who's had a setback, or maybe something didn't work out the way they wanted to. Maybe the big idea that they had, or the first idea, or their first passion didn't work out, whatever it might be, it didn't pan out. It's the way you discovered racquetball. It's not even something you were interested in. It sounds like it wasn't something you really respected as a sport. I mean, right. Let's face it, you thought you can go in there without ever having picked up a racket and tear this uncle apart and just be like, this will be fun and you'll have a blast doing this and it'll be so easy. And you go in and you experience something completely different. And I think what ends up happening there is you start to appreciate what you didn't know about this game. You start to appreciate, as you kept referring to, the geometry that's involved in this. And wow, how this out of shape older guy can run circles around you. And it's because he's using the geometry. Like, he understands this game so well that he can do this. And I think that's important for someone listening who is not sure, okay, what do I do? Or what is my interest? Or what might it be? Even if you haven't figured out the first interest, that first passion, that first whatever it might be, I think the key here is give things a try. You never know. And you might actually be surprised. It might be something that right now you don't actually respect very much, or you don't think much of. Maybe that, or maybe saying that you don't respect it is a little too much, but you don't think much of it at the moment. I mean, I remember for me, golf was very similar. A buddy of mine just wanted me to get into golf, let's take lessons. I'm like, dude, this is stupid. Bunch of
the ball's just sitting there. How hard can it be?
Yeah, I know, right? And it doesn't weigh anything, and it's a bunch of old guys who play this. Dude, I play soccer. I don't think golf is my thing. And then I go with him to take lessons, and everything you just said, blown away by the complexity, how much there is to this. I start to appreciate so much more. And then, very similar to you, I want to start taking lessons. I want to start practicing. I want to start, how do I get more involved? How do I learn more? And now I'm into it. It's so cool. And I'm not even good at it, but I discovered something that I never even would have given much attention to or credit to or anything. And now I appreciate it. So I love that part about your story, because I want people to really listen. It may not be what you think it could be, but you got to give it a chance, and you never know how you might appreciate it as you did.
It was such an amazing journey for me, because again, I never felt like I really belonged in high school. Like I was friends with one or two of the cool kids, but not, I just never had the right clique that I hung around in. And I didn't play on the baseball team, or I wasn't an athlete in school after the injury as a wrestler. And racquetball has such a diverse group of people. And I was always the young kid, but I got to hang out with the older people. And then I started playing tournaments and stuff, and would travel within Arizona to go to different cities to play tournaments and things like that. And just kind of developed a circle of friends outside of high school. And so I went through the motions of high school until about 3 months left in my senior year. And I finally realized, oh, this is all about to be over. and I finally sort of, started making effort to be friends with more people and stuff like that. And of course, it was almost too late. And then at that stage, I was, as an amateur player, I was, let's say, 2/3 of my way towards the top. So I wasn't a standout player within the state or anything. But I was climbing the ladder, and again, typically competing against older players. It wasn't, unlike wrestling, it's not, weight classes, it's not age groups, it's just based on ability. And sometimes those descriptions are a little gray. So within the same classification, you get somebody that's at the bottom and you get somebody that's at the top, and it seems like they're worlds apart, even though technically they're in that same group. And so this was great. You of all people will appreciate this. Entrepreneurship is like getting kicked in the shins every day until finally somebody just steps on your toes, right? It's like, it's so hard for so long until you finally get a break. And that's how my athletic career was. Wrestling was very difficult, and then I had the injury and had to pivot. I started out at the very, very bottom of the food chain in racquetball, worked my way up, moved up too soon from one class to another fairly frequently, where I'm sure over the totality of my career, I have way more losses than wins, because I would play in an event and play two divisions, the one above where I should be, and then the one where I actually belonged, and I was probably middle of the road then. And as soon as I started getting some traction in that group, I just wanted to be in the next group, and then the next one, and the next one, and I just kept moving up before I ever learned to win and dominate in a certain group and then exit out. And until I got to the Pro Tour, that's exactly what I did. So even through college, when I played at college, but not, I was the Northern Arizona University racquetball team. The 1 year that I played in college, I was the only player. So I went to the intercollegiate championships and I finished like 35th out of 70 schools by myself. And so, but again, I got exposed to some really good players, got some professional level players then, and, just kept chipping away at it. And I finally decided, being here in the small town of Flagstaff, Arizona, being the best player in town, and now being one of the best players in Arizona at that point, if I want to get better, I got to find different people to compete with. And so I moved back to Phoenix and got a job at a health club and trained and practiced and played every time I wasn't on the clock. And then I started going to tournaments out of state, around the country, and then at 24, finally threw my hat in the ring to turn pro.
A big takeaway from that story that I think applies to anyone in whatever it is that you might be doing, whether it's corporate or entrepreneurship or whatever it might be, is this idea that you realized I need to go play with the different level of competition. Like, I've maxed myself out here where I am, and I recognize that, and I need to go put myself in a place where I would be uncomfortable again, where I will not be the best one, where I will probably be the bottom of that group, and then that way I have something to work up to. I think that's an important thing, because I think it's so easy to try to create the circumstances so that we can do well, right? Like, who doesn't want to who wants to do badly, right? Nobody. We all want to succeed and all of that. But to go out of your way to say, how can I find a circumstance where I'm not going to do well in order to grow and do way better?
Yeah.
That's the important takeaway. And I challenge any listener here, if there's something that you're doing that you feel that you have topped out or maxed out at, perhaps ask the same question, that Darrin just asked, where can I go to get better competition? Where can I go to be challenged again and really step that up?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assumption that you have a fairly smart audience. So it's easy to read between the lines of my sports-related stories to see the parallels to entrepreneurship or life in the corporate world, right? We've all heard the adage that you're the average of the 10 people that you hang around with. Well, I kept changing that group of people so that I, like you said, was always towards the bottom and always had people to model myself after, to learn from, to challenge and grow. Otherwise, I would have just stayed the same player, and that was not my plan. Being uncomfortable is just part of the ride, and I don't know that you ever get used to it, but you just learn to deal with it more effectively, and that kind of means that you have an unlimited potential. If you can learn to deal with being uncomfortable and not knowing all the answers and being in unfamiliar territory frequently, if you can learn to deal with that, man, there's not much you can't set your mind to and go accomplish eventually.
Yeah, I remember learning this lesson on the soccer pitch when I was young. My dad encouraged me to. He often coached the teams that I was on. At least most of the teams that I was on. And I remember when we sometimes go play pickup or whatever, or even just practice. There was this guy on our team who was just incredibly good. He was a forward and I was a defender. And he was so good, not just like a regular forward. I'm talking like the guy who could dance around every defender and just make it look so easy. Like, how was he in this division? And I guess I said something about a curiosity with playing up front. And my dad said, play with Juan Carlos. And I'm like, no way. He the guy, maybe with somebody not so much like him, maybe somebody like who's a lot closer to my level. No, play with someone like him because he's gonna force you. He's gonna drag you up.
Yep.
Not right. Trust me, you will not drag him down. Yeah. He will drag you up. He will pull you up. And I did it. I gave it a shot that day and I played with him. And of course it was a massive uphill climb. But Juan Carlos was dragging me. He was pulling me. He was forcing me to level up so that I could keep up with him. And that's another thing. When you play with someone at a higher level, they actually know how to engage someone who is not at that level. Yep. They know how to dial down for a moment or how to place, in the Juan Carlos's case, a perfect pass so that I stand a better chance of being able to join that play versus a too complicated pass that it would require somebody as advanced as he was. Right. He knew how to dial that up or down as needed so that he can pull people up and bring them to his level. And I think that's what you find when you move up, is that you're going to find people like that who are going to help you out in this way.
Yeah, not everybody's as benevolent as Juan Carlos, maybe, but yes, if you surround yourself with the right people, lots of people are willing to help you improve and get better, because if you do end up at their level, then now they have somebody that can also push them as well. And so, yeah, that should always be part of the process. Again, not everybody sees it that way, but you as an individual can certainly pick and choose who you surround yourself with to give you yourself the best chance for advancement.
Exactly. So let's fast forward a little bit, because there's this moment when you are reaching the decision to retire from the game. And we talked a little bit about this during our prep call. Yeah. This challenge with an identity shift that you were going through. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just did a talk at Arizona State University last week, and I incorporated this story, which was the first time I had ever told it in a talk like that. I really should have retired a half a season before I did. At the end of my fifth year out on the pro tour, I was pretty well burned out, and I had spent basically 3 years at number 18. That was my ceiling. I could beat guys below me. In most of the time, it wasn't a guarantee, but I was not winning matches against anybody ranked above me, even 17 and 16, which is right above me. I just had plateaued. And a word of caution, I learned this one the hard way. At that moment in time, I was unhappy because all I could see was 17 people standing in line ahead of me. I never turned around to see the entire planet lined up behind me to realize what I had done. It took me several years after I retired to really have an appreciation for all the hard work I had done and what I had accomplished. But at some point, I reached, I made a job out of the thing that I loved, and eventually the novelty of it wore off. The travel was a grind. I've spent more money than I made every year as a pro racquetball player on airline tickets and entry fees and stuff like that. But this was who I was. Like, I practically introduced myself to people as Darrin Schenck, pro racquetball player, right? Like, it was part of my name. And I went to the first couple tournaments of that last season. I went to a tournament in Chicago, and I lost to a guy that was ranked below me, who I thought I should have beaten. And I didn't even have the heart to try for most of that match. He said something between the second and third game where if he wouldn't have said anything, I overheard him say something to a friend of his. If he wouldn't have said anything, I would have just rolled over and been done. But he kind of indicated like, hey, I'm kicking his butt. I'll be done in about 15 minutes. And that did not sit well with me. So all of a sudden I turned on and played incredibly well, and I beat him 11-0 that game. And then it's like, okay, I proved my point. I am better than you, but I don't want to be here. And the next game I lost, and I broke my racket and picked up my stuff, and I walked past the tournament director and said, I'll take the fine. I'm not reffing the next match. I'm going home. And so I walked to the hotel. This is in Chicago in October, right? So the wind's blowing. I'm freezing. I walked 4 miles to the hotel, gather up my stuff, call a cab because this was long before Uber, go to the airport, never even showered. All I did was roll my knee pad down from my knee down to my ankle. That was it. Yeah. And I go to the airport and I sit there for like 4 hours till I can get on a flight back to Phoenix. And I called my dad and I said, hey, can you pick me up at the airport? And I live closer to the airport than he does. He's like, yeah, sure. Everything okay? I'm like, just had a rough one. I'll talk to you later. And so I get on the plane, and again, I'm still sweaty and gross from my match. And I get to Phoenix, and he's pulling up just as I'm walking out of the door. And Roger, I'm not kidding you when I say I was halfway in the car and I started crying. Like I just lost it. And I'm I didn't even look at him because I knew that would just completely break me. And I'm just waiting for come on, son, you got to, when times get tough, you got to get tougher. You've been in tough spots before, yada, yada. I cried the whole way home. And we got to my driveway, and he stopped and he turned the car off. And I'm like, okay, here it comes. He's going to say the right thing to snap me out of this. And I finally looked over and made eye contact with him. And all he said was, you'll figure it out. And that was it. I got my stuff and got out of the car, and he drove away. And once again, my plans for the future have been, that rug has been yanked out from under me. And I wandered around lost and confused and complete identity crisis for quite a while, because so much of basically my whole adult life had been geared towards me reaching that pinnacle and being that guy. And now I hate it. Like, it's not like I even want to play local tournaments and go back to winning on a local stage. Like, I don't want any of it. That was the last pro match I ever played. And I did try to play a couple of amateur tournaments after taking some time off, and it was just gone. I couldn't do it. The desire and the love were gone. And so I took some time away and eventually reinvented myself. That was time to get a real job at that point. And so I got an amazing opportunity to work for an eye doctor who did what's called sports vision therapy. And I was a patient of his. And then when he found out that I had retired, he's like, oh, well, I want to start working with more athletes. Would you come work for me? And then you can work with the athletes. And so I went through the program to be a what's called a certified optometric vision therapist, and ended up working at an athlete training facility here in Phoenix, where I got to work out with and then do vision therapy with not all of these athletes, but I worked out with these names like Donovan McNabb and Aeneas Williams and Charles Johnson and Andre Hastings, all these NFL guys. And then a bunch of the Olympians were training at that place as well. That's where Gary Hall Jr. and a bunch of the other swimmers were training. Just an amazing environment. Once again, being the low guy on the totem pole, having to work my way up the food chain to feel like I belong there and fit in. And that was an amazing experience. And that really kind of helped me get my feet back under me. And then as you alluded to earlier, that's when I segued into coaching a few years after that.
Wow. This so much to take apart from that story. So I'm trying to think where to start. The first part is the saying goodbye to something that had held such an important place in your heart. I mean, this is the nature of reinvention as we move from one chapter to another, close one out, start up another one.
Yep.
And sometimes we are thrown out. Sometimes we walk out, sometimes it's something in between that we can't even imagine. But chapters do close and they come to an end, and they're hard, I think, either way, whether you voluntarily walk out or you are walked out. It's still difficult to say goodbye for a lot of reasons, including this one that you mentioned, the identity part, shedding an identity. And then who am I if I am not this professional racquetball player? Like, how do you answer that question right away after you've shed that identity, but you don't yet have the new one? But what I took away also from this new opportunity that emerged, that was not disconnected from your past career, right? It was a door that was opened through your work as a client for this eye doctor.
Right.
And that turned into an opportunity that, hey, how to work with athletes, how to talk to them, maybe you can help, come be a part of this team and help us out with athletes. We want to grow that part of the business. Oh, wow. It's probably not something you imagined on your own. Like, hey, you know what I want to do when I grow up? I want to work with an eye doctor who is looking to grow their athlete business.
Right.
That's what I'm going to do as an eye person therapist. You mentioned, I can't remember the title.
Yep.
And so that's what I'm going to do. No, I mean, nobody wakes up and says that, on their own, but that's life, right? That's how things unfold. That's how people end up doing these types of things that then give way to others. And that's what I want listeners to really pay attention to in your story, because whatever the setback, whatever you might be leaving, especially if you've been forced to leave, you know, there are a lot of layoffs going on right now. So for many people, the exit was, you know, they didn't ask for it. It was, you know,
you were shown the door. Yeah,
exactly. You were shown the door, and now you're like, wait a minute, but I'm still this other thing. And except you're not anymore, according to these folks. They told you you're not. And so now what do you do with that? You know, don't toss away something that doesn't sound like, you know, like the most perfect and the most ideal role, because you never know how that might pave the way for yet another opportunity, coaching, speaking, and the other thing, and what you'll catch us up now on what you're doing today.
Yeah.
So take us a little further, because obviously you did not stay in that role forever.
Yeah.
You know, so catch us up to these days at Triage Now.
Yeah. Well, let me add one more thought to kind of encapsulate what we just discussed. What I eventually discovered, this would have been great to know during that process, but eventually I was able to look back with clarity and see. And I want to make sure that the audience hears this message, because somebody out there might really need it right now. And that is, my value was not based on my ranking or the fact that I could hit a backhand better than almost anybody on the planet, right? My value was the fact that I was on this journey and I was learning and growing as a person so much. That's what the value that's what my self-worth it should be based on, not my career ranking or, you know, did I win the last tournament, or, you know, where did I finish? None of that stuff should matter. It was really the journey that I was on, and the fact that I was continually pursuing something I loved, willing to stretch and grow, deal with the hardships and the tough times and bounce back and all that stuff. That's what I should have been measuring myself against the rest of the world for, not, okay, well, if I'm no longer number 18, now I'm nobody, because that's just not true. But in that time, that's very hard to see.
Yeah, I can imagine. So bring us to the Triage Now opportunity.
Yeah, so
fast forward us a little bit.
I went through several iterations of my sales career. I did medical sales for a little while. I did corporate relocation, which is a fancy way to say I worked in the moving business. I did commercial interiors for a little while as well. And then I joined the team at Triage Now as one of the 5 founding people. My name's not on the door, but I was a day one employee. And once again, in this upriver swim of not knowing much of anything in this particular area, it's technically on the front end of the work comp situation, the workplace injury scenario and the work comp industry. But we're a medical advisement group. That's basically what we do, is we guide injured employees to the appropriate level of care. My job was to sell that service. Well, when we started out, we had an insurance partner, but his firm got bought out like a month after we started. He was supposed to be my mentor, teaching me the ropes and the ins and outs of workers' compensation. Part of the buyout agreement was that he had to divest with Triage Now because they felt like that was a conflict of interest. All of a sudden, I'm on my own. The owner of the company is trying to make sure the company stays alive and being, just every attention to every detail there is. You're in charge of sales. You go figure out how to sell this and start making the phone ring so we can get paid. And it was a struggle. The first several years of this were very, very difficult. I didn't have a blueprint to follow. We only had a couple of competitors, but they were national level competitors, and we were trying to focus on a local market to get our feet wet and figure things out. But just like the other stories I've shared so far, I kept working, I kept grinding, I kept trying to find people to help me get better, to learn more, to sharpen my craft. And we had a tipping point about, I don't remember if it was year 5 or year 6 in the business, but we landed a partnership with a major insurance carrier. We were one of 3 vetted partners for this service. So we beat out some other major competitors. And now every client that I go to from now on, I name drop that insurance carrier and just plant the seed that, oh, well, if you're good enough for them, you're good enough for us. And at that point, all of a sudden we turned and we were swimming downriver. And now I work with a whole bunch of Fortune 100 companies, lots of people on the Fortune 500 list, but also all the way down to companies that might have 1 or 2 dozen employees and maybe call us with 2 or 3 injuries a year. We want to help everybody with that service. So we didn't structure a business that was focused solely on the Fortune 100. It was actually from the bottom up. And that's turned out to be a very effective approach. And in a mere 12 years, we have gone from oblivion to one of the top 5 providers in the space. And we have clients that are household names that lots and lots of people would know. It's been, the last 4 or 5 years have been a lot easier and a lot more fun. The good times have outweighed the bad a lot in the last few years. But overall, once again, it's been very educational and informative and humbling. And, some of the wins have been amazing wins to celebrate. And I do my best to not take any win for granted because, it took a long time to get here. So this has about the same tenure as my racquetball career did. It's the only thing I've done for this length of time.
Awesome. So Darrin, let's talk a little bit about now your coaching and speaking practice, because, as you mentioned, you're really settled into this role as this VP role at Triage Now. You started off as employee number 5. Yeah. You've been part of that team for as long as you've been a professional racquetball. So this has been the next, the most significant other chapter of your life. But you've added another dimension to it, this entrepreneurial venture as a coach and speaker. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So yeah, I've always been interested in public speaking, but I've never done anything to pursue it until recently. And I finally took the plunge. And like you said, I settled into my role at Triage Now. And one of the ways that I've helped differentiate our company is to be a panel expert or a speaker in my day job. And I've really loved it. And so now I've expanded that out to doing things at colleges and universities here in Arizona. And I've done some corporate stuff as well. Scottsdale, Arizona is kind of a hotbed for corporate retreats and company meetings and things like that. So I get to do things I've done a couple of talks for franchisee meetings and things like that and really enjoy it. But I would say the thing I'm most passionate about is going back to my days as the coach at the ASU racquetball team. I love working with college kids. And so I've extended that experience that I had there as the racquetball coach into my speaking and coaching role. So I love talking to those audiences, but now I'm also offering group coaching and one-on-one coaching for the university students as well. And that has been, Roger, it's so rewarding. I mean, it's so much fun. Like, I have a girl that I've been working with in the last week and helped her get ready for a job interview. She went in and nailed it. They called her back and brought her back for a next day interview as a final interview. We talked again, got her ready. She got the job, and she was practically in tears when she called me. She was so excited. And I'm getting chills just telling you the story because that's so much fun to be part of that process for somebody. And I've been through that many, many times myself. And I did interviews at Triage now for a long, long time. So I can kind of help craft, a message that somebody should deliver from that side of the table, so to speak. And it's been really cool to try to help, get those kids ready for the transition out of college, either into an internship or into the corporate world, making sure they're as prepared as possible to take advantage of those things. So that's been a great addition for me to add to what I'm doing. Super rewarding. And if it can actually get paid to do something that I love, man, I'm really firing on all cylinders.
Well, I mean, I could definitely speak to how fulfilling it is to be able to help people as a coach and a speaker. So I totally get where you're coming.
Yeah, I know you do. Yeah.
And what I love about what you said in your story is how this was something that you were able to spin off of what you do at work, in your day job. Yep. You already did a lot of speaking at conferences, panels, different places. And you thought, wait a minute, what if I expanded this a little bit more? And what if I directed it in if I put it into a direction where I could also draw a lot of fulfillment, but in a way that I can't quite do in my day job. And what I want to lift up from this story for our listeners here is that this is a really great example of how you can create this really unique balance with purpose-driven entrepreneurship, where you have your day job, and if everything is going great and you love what you're doing, there's no need to leave that opportunity. Yeah. But if there's this other area that you want to explore, you got to there are opportunities to play around with finding the right mix. What's that nice balance? And I feel like you're in that journey right now. You're figuring out that mix. You're figuring out that balance. No doubt you continue as every month goes by to get a little closer to, this is working, this is not. Maybe then you dial it up too much. You're like, that got to be a little too busy.
Exactly right.
Be careful with that.
Yep.
Darrin, thank you so much for your time, for sharing all of these incredible stories, especially through all of these transitions. Your transitions were so clear, and this is such an important thing for this podcast, and we really appreciate you. Where can we point people to who want to learn more about you?
I'm still working on my social media presence. LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me, and also my website, which is just darrinschenck.com. If there's somebody out there that feels like they could benefit from something I might be able to share directly, I'd love to hear from it. And Roger, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
No, it's been my pleasure. We learned a lot. And I thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the School of Reinvention podcast. Again, I'm your host, Roger Osorio. If you're ready to start your journey to reinvention and want to walk the path with others, visit www.rogerosorio.com and go to the School of Reinvention to check out for yourself how a community-based coaching platform can help you begin your next reinvention. You can also go to rogerosorio.com to purchase my new book, The Journey to Reinvention, and receive some exciting bonuses. Until next time, make your day great.